Terrific. So let's give a nice warm Warwick's welcome to Tea Obreht.
Hi, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and special thanks to Julie and all the staff here, and to Warwick's itself for having me, and thank you all. There are so many of you, and I didn't realize that when I was hiding in the back, but thank you all so much for coming. This is a huge honor. I did it. Yes. Now that since there are so many of you standing, I would be doing something special tonight. I would be reading the whole book from cover to cover. This is a very special reading for me, and kicks off a very special part of the tour, because I went to high school and college in California, so emotionally for me, this particular leg of the tour is a homecoming, and I started here, so thank you for being part of that. My book is The Tiger's Wife, and I'll be reading from it shortly, and not for very long. I'm happy to do Q&A and talk a little bit or a lot about the book, depending on however you guys feel. We'll play it by ear, and questions and non-questions, and I don't know how many people have read it or not, and so that dictates how it's going to go. But to tell you a little bit about the book, it's a story of Natalia, who is a doctor in an unnamed area, an unnamed sector of the former Yugoslavia, and she, while on a mission of mercy to an orphanage across the border, discovers that her beloved grandfather is dead, and that the circumstances around his death are very, very mysterious, and linked somehow to stories that he used to tell her about his childhood and his young adulthood, and his relationships with two particular sets of people. One, an escaped tiger, and a woman called the Tiger's Wife when he was a child, and the Deathless Man when he was a young doctor. Is this on? Can you hear me? That better? Okay, sorry. So the book began as a short story when I was a graduate student at Cornell. I had just moved to Ithaca from Los Angeles, which, if any of you have ever made such a move, you know that it is unbelievably pleasant and all kinds of wonderful to go from, palm trees and the sea to landlocked snow, so much shoveling, and and being someone coming from a very limited climate kind of place, I was very excited for my first time. I was like, yes, it's going to be great, skiing, wonderful, and then moved there and realized after the first 2 times I had to dig up my whole car, and then once accidentally dug up someone else's car before I realized it was not mine, that perhaps it was not. I was not cut out for it. So in the midst of my first winter there, I lived in this tiny little subterranean apartment, which was built for torture, because its window was partially above ground and partially below ground, so that when you stood in the apartment, you were underground to the waist, and then, so when the snow would begin to fall, it would cover up the window slowly, and you would stand there watching, the daylight go from you. And during one of the first snowstorms of the year, I was housebound and, sort of unwilling to shovel my way out. And there was a National Geographic special on about tigers. And this wonderful woman who, this Russian researcher who had this pair of captive tigers, and that was all very interesting, and he was doing interesting research. And then this, his wife, who was this wonderful woman who could, because she had been raising them since they were cubs, she was able to talk them down from these, violent tempers that they would fly into. And, I thought, oh, this is interesting, and sat down and wrote a short story called The Tiger's Wife, which was about a young deaf-mute circus performer and her escaped tiger, and a little boy who watches their interaction. And, got very excited about it and was sort of thrilled, because somehow it had moved into the realm of the Balkans, which, even though I was originally from there, I had never touched on in my writing before, and went to workshops sort of very happily, very eager to discuss it, and just got destroyed because everybody hated it, and it was and it was an awful short story, and it was. I've read it since, and it was an awful short story. And one of my good friends and colleagues in the workshop, I remember his name's Alexi Zentner, and he has a book out now too. He said, "This is a short story that has pitchfork wielding rabble. There are peasants with pitchforks in this short story, and yet the story is not Frankenstein. So what are they doing there? You know, there shouldn't be pitchfork wielding people in anything except Frankenstein." So sure enough, there are no more pitchforks in the book. But even though the short story didn't quite work at all, I was very attached to the characters. As time went on, I said, okay, I'm gonna turn this into something that is going to work. I'll just turn it into a bigger short story. That'll be better. So kept working on it, and all these elements started to come in. This little boy needed to be somebody grown up, and he suddenly turned into this the grandfather of this narrator, which I believed to be completely unrelated to the fact that my own grandfather had passed 6 months before that, and sort of in a total not in touch with your own whatever moment. And then this short story went from 20 pages to 35 pages, and I was like, this is a long short story, but still we'll make this work. And realized a few weeks later that I was in fact writing a novel and not a short story anymore, which was a different moment than I thought it was going to be, because all of us had come into the workshop believing that we would start with short stories, eventually we would write a novel, and this moment would look something like this. We would arrive at the workshop, pound our fist on the table and say, I have decided that I'm ready to write a novel, and today is a great day in my life, and aren't you happy for me? And then you would be boosted up on people's shoulders and carried about the room, and truly it would be a special experience and bonding moment for everybody, when in fact it was more like, this short story is now 35 pages long, and I'm still not done with it. I guess it's going to be 40 pages. Well, this short story is 60 pages long, and I'm still not done with it. I guess it's going to be 70. Oh God, it's 100 pages long. It must be a novel. 2 in the morning, bags down to here. So, so that was a lot less glamorous than any of us thought it would be for all of us. And actually, all of us ended up writing novels in much the same way. But what I'm about to read to you, which will only be about 10 minutes, is one of the original sections from the first draft, and one of the only things that did not change as the book went through many, many edits. And it's the prologue, the very beginning of the book. So I'll read it now. In my earliest memory, my grandfather is bald as a stone, and he takes me to see the tigers. He puts on his hat, his big buttoned raincoat, and I wear my lacquered shoes and velvet dress. It is autumn, and I am 4 years old. The certainty of this process, my grandfather's hand, the bright hiss of the trolley, the dampness of the morning, the crowded walk up the hill to the Citadel Park. Always in my grandfather's breast pocket, the Jungle Book with its gold leaf cover and old yellow pages. I am not allowed to hold it, but it will stay open on his knee all afternoon while he recites the passages to me. Even though my grandfather is not wearing his stethoscope or white coat, the lady at the ticket counter in the entrance shed calls him Doctor. Then there is the popcorn cart, the umbrella stand, a small kiosk with postcards and pictures. Down the stairs and past the aviary where the sharp-eared owls sleep, through the garden that runs the length of the Citadel wall framed with cages. Once there was a king here, a sultan, his janissaries. Now the cannon windows facing the street hold blocked-off troughs filled with tepid water. The cage bars curve out, rusted orange. In his free hand, my grandfather is carrying the blue bag my grandma has prepared for us. In it, 6-day-old cabbage heads for the hippopotamus, carrots and celery for the sheep and the deer, and the bull moose, who is a kind of phenomenon. In his pocket, my grandfather has hidden some sugar cubes for the pony that pulls the park carriage. I will not remember this as sentimentality, but as greatness. The tigers live in the outer moat of the fortress. We climb the castle stairs, past the water birds and the sweating windows of the monkey house, past the wolf growing his winter coat. We pass the bearded vultures, and then the bears, asleep all day, smelling of damp earth and the death of something. My grandfather picks me up and props my feet against the handrail so I can look down and see the tigers in the moat. My grandfather never refers to the tiger's wife by name. His arm is around me, and my feet are on the handrail, and my grandfather might say, "I once knew a girl who loved tigers so much she almost became one herself." Because I am little, and my love of tigers comes directly from him, I believe he is talking about me, offering me a fairy tale in which I can imagine myself, and will for years. The cages face a courtyard, and we go down the stairs and walk slowly from cage to cage. There is a panther, too, ghost spots paling his oil-slick coat, a sleepy, bloated lion from Africa. But the tigers are awake and livid, bright with rancor. Stripe-lashed shoulders rolling, they flank one another up and down the narrow causeway of rock, and the smell of them is sour and warm and fills everything. It will stay with me the whole day, even after I have had my bath and gone to bed, and will return at random times, at school, at a friend's birthday party, even years later at the pathology lab, or on the drive home from Galena. I remember this, too, an altercation. A small group of people stand clustered around the tiger's cage. Among them, a boy with a parrot-shaped balloon, a woman in a purple coat, and a bearded man who is wearing the brown uniform of a zookeeper. The man has a broom and a dustpan on a long handle, and he is sweeping the area between the cage and the outer railing. He walks up and down, sweeping up juice boxes and candy wrappers, bits of popcorn people have tried to throw at the tigers. The tigers walk up and down with him. The woman in purple is saying something and smiling, and he smiles back at her. She has brown hair. The dustpan keeper stops and leans against the handle of his broom, and as he does so, the bigger of the two tigers sweeps by, rubbing against the bars of the cage, rumbling, and the keeper puts a hand through the bars and touches its flank. For a moment, nothing, and then pandemonium. The tiger rounds on him, and the woman shrieks, and suddenly the dustpan keeper's shoulder is between the bars, and he is twisting his head away and trying to reach for the outer railing so that he has something to hold on to. The tiger has the dustpan keeper's arm the way a dog holds a large bone, upright between his paws, gnawing on the top. Two men who have been standing by with children jump over the railing and grab the dustpan keeper's waist and flailing arm and try to pull him away. The third man jams his umbrella through the bars and pushes it over and over again into the tiger's ribs. An outraged scream from the tiger, and then it stands up on its hind legs and hugs the dustpan keeper's arm and shakes its head from side to side like it's pulling on rope. Its ears are flattened, and it is making a noise like a locomotive. The dustpan keeper's face is white, and this entire time he hasn't made a sound. Then suddenly it's no longer worth it, and the tiger lets go. The three men fall away, and there is a splatter of blood. The tiger is lashing its tail, and the dustpan keeper is crawling under the outer railing and standing up. The woman in purple has vanished. My grandfather has not turned away. I am 4 years old, but he has not turned me away either. I see it all, and later there is the fact that he wants me to have seen. Then the dustpan keeper is hurrying our way, winding a piece of torn shirt across his arm. He is red-faced and angry, on his way to the infirmary. At the time, I believe this is fear, but later I will know it as shame. The tigers, agitated, are lunging back and forth across the grate. The keeper is leaving a dark trail in the gravel behind him. As he passes us, my grandfather says, "My God, you're a fool, aren't you?" And the man says something in reply, something I know not to repeat. Instead, shrill and self-righteous in my lacquered boots, brave because my grandfather is holding my hand, I say, "He's a fool, isn't he, Grandpa?" But my grandfather is already walking after the dustpan keeper, pulling me along and calling for the man to stop so he can help him. So that's the beginning of the book. And as the book goes on, I just realized halfway through reading that my mind sort of stepped out for a moment and was like, we're reading about the zoo in San Diego. And I would like you all to know that yesterday after I landed, that was the first thing I did. I went to this. As the book progressed, even though none of this is really autobiographical except for, you know, tiny details here and there, it became more and more emotionally autobiographical in the relationship between Natalia and her grandfather, which is very similar to the relationship that I had with my grandfather. And that little boy from the original story, you know, becomes this wise and grumpy, and yet incredibly kind old man about whom, you know, the entire book revolves. And the book was written, and you know, I got together with my agent, and it was sent out and bought at auction by Random House, by the Dial Press, and then to Random House, and edits began. And this was also a new. I mean, everything about this, including this, was a learning experience and something completely new for me. Right about that time, as I got my edits back from my editor for the first time and sort of stared at these pages and pages of notes that I was somehow supposed to process, and began processing them, I was asked by Harper's Magazine to go back to Serbia and Croatia and do a nonfiction, in order to research a nonfiction piece for the magazine. A nonfiction piece that involved vampire hunting. True story. I don't know if any of you have noticed this, but vampires are back in a big way. There's this series called Twilight. Everybody's read it. Other series too, and there was this sort of interest in the difference between the Western vampire and the, you know, sort of classical Balkan vampire, and learning what this was all about. So I went for my research trip, you know, sort of very bare bones kind of process, which involved, you know, seeking those places that they were supposed, these vampire occurrences were supposed to have happened several hundred years ago, finding out that those places were surprisingly not named the same thing anymore. And then, you know, getting various villagers to point us in the direction of, you know, the roads, as they were called now, and arriving at people's doors, knocking, and saying something like, "Hi, you don't know me, but I'm here to find out about the vampire. Can you tell us anything about it?" And, you know, one of two things would happen. They would either invite you in for really strong liquor and proceed to regale you with tales of the vampire they had, you know, seen, murdered, whatever. Or they would slam the door in your face, which happened more often than the former. But we, you know, we still, you know, we got to do this incredible thing and heard amazing stories from amazing people, and this involved a lot of regional mythology. And I realized that a lot of the way regional mythology works in vampire stories connected back to the tiger's wife in ways that I hadn't expected. I just said the word "way" like 3 times in that sentence. I'm so sorry. It makes no sense. But anyway, it connected back to the tiger's wife, and I hadn't expected that. And I had reconnected to the Balkans through something that I hadn't anticipated, and in a way that I didn't expect. And went back and kept writing, took my book back from my editor, and kept writing, and kept writing, and kept editing. Sure enough, that connection to the Balkans and that connection to these dark stories that fuel the imagination of isolated places and very small communities became very necessary in reinvigorating the book. And I was lucky enough that my editor wanted to read it again when it was written again. Here it is now, and it's almost a year since publication, March 8th, 2011. And here I am, and I thank you so much for supporting it, and I'm happy to answer questions or read more, whatever you would like. But that is sort of the story of the tiger's wife and how it came to be. Questions? Reading? What should we do? Questions? Questions. Okay. Yes.
When I read the book, it seemed to me to be in the genre of magical realism, and I wondered if you've been influenced by other authors in that genre.
Sure. The question was, should I repeat the question? Because it's kind of a... the question was about magical realism, and this particular reader thinks that it falls in the genre of magical realism, and am I influenced by the genre? I absolutely am, and I'm a rabid fan of writers like Garcia Marquez, and I adore Love in the Time of Cholera, which I've read multiple times, you know, from sort of different standpoints in my own life, and I understand it a completely different way every time I read it. I also, my favorite book at the moment, because this fluctuates, my favorite book is Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita, which, even though it doesn't fall into the genre of magical realism technically by not being South American literature, is very close in that vein. And if you haven't read it, I can't encourage you to read. Like, I can't encourage you. I cannot encourage you enough to read it. I'm sorry, I tripped. I think that there's people have said to me that there is magical realism in this book, and even though it wasn't something that I set out to write with an agenda, I think that what you read heavily influences what you end up writing. I mean, nobody wants to write what they don't want to read. I think it's a long time to spend on something that you know. So yes, thank you. Yes. Sorry, I realize that I'm randomly pointing into the audience. Go ahead.
Could you talk a little about The Deathless Man?
Yeah. Absolutely. The Deathless Man, I think, was not as influenced by the vampire trip as you might believe. He was already there in his entirety in an earlier draft, and sort of stayed, and is the one part of the book that was sort of unchanged by the editing process. The Deathless Man comes from Slavic folklore, and Balkan folklore and German folklore. And generally he is presented in folk tales. They're very brief folk tales. They're not one of those like Vasilisa epics that go on and on and on for pages. He's this village idiot who tricks or traps or somehow disgruntles death, and is immediately punished by instant death or lack thereof. And I was very interested, because of what I was going through in coping with my grandfather's death, in the latter punishment, this idea of death of immortality as punishment, and the absence of death is something that would be traumatic to someone. And I couldn't understand how that could be. And so when I started writing the novel, he was this very sinister character who was supposed to appear. I think that in an early draft he appears, you know, with an axe or something, and just sort of stands in a corner, which you know, I like to think that I've you know, gotten more subtle than that, but who knows. And as I wrote the book and spent more time with the character, and most of that time was sort of spent looking over my shoulder, because my desk sort of faces a wind, you know, a wall, and I would write late at night, and then I would write these Deathless Man sections that would sort of start to frighten me, and I would do a lot of, you know, he became more and more comforting, and he became this sort of cheerful character who had a sense of humor and had this funny way of talking, and he really liked food, and there was this coffee cup, you know, that he really liked, and it surprised me the way it ended up. But in the end, I think he's the character that I was the most attached to when all said and done. So yeah, thank you.
What's your original connection with the Balkans?
Oh, my original connection with the Balkans. I was born in Belgrade when it was still Yugoslavia, to a mixed family. My grandmother is Bosnian Muslim. My grandfather was a Slovene Roman Catholic. I was born in Serbia. And my stepdad is Serbian Orthodox, so we celebrate Christmas twice. In fact, on completely, it was, I mean, it was the condition of things at the time for holidays to be quite secular and very private. And before the wars, you know, nobody really asked you about your religion. I mean, it didn't matter. These different ethnicities, you know, governed by religious ways of life would just intermarry. It wasn't a shock that my grandparents, you know, that a Roman Catholic married a Muslim. It just wasn't, you know, horribly controversial in Tito's Yugoslavia. And then when the breakup happened, you know, we were a mixed family, and a lot of mixed families were forced to choose, because when you have somebody, you have one person on every side, you know, where are you going to be? And my folks didn't want to make that choice, and luckily my mom got a job in Cyprus, so we moved when I was 7 to Cyprus, and then to Egypt, where I had several fantastic years of sort of growing up digging sand, this time not snow. Yeah, that's my connection to the Balkans. Yes. And
Is
then,
there any significance to the Jungle Book? I know it seemed like a treasured thing in his pocket that.
you mean in my own life?
Well,
No, what the
in the story, is there, because it seems to have popped kind of in and out, and it just seemed like it was such a treasured thing.
Yeah, and it's how far are you in the? Have you finished?
I finished it.
The book? Okay. I'm happy to answer that question. I mean, the significance of the Jungle Book is something that weaves together both the grandfather and Natalia and their sort of her childhood experience of his having the Jungle Book, and then the Jungle Book being bound to his childhood in this special way through the relationship with the tiger's wife and what's in the pages, which I won't reveal to those who haven't read the book. I think it ties back to his childhood in a very significant way, and is the thing that she is searching for most in his missing bag of belongings. Other than that, I won't. If you have more questions in that vein, I'm happy to answer them offside, because I don't know who's. I made the mistake once of answering a question about the end of the book in front of people, like at my very first reading, and like something like 90% of the audience hadn't read the book, and I ruined the ending for everybody, and there was this, you know. Yes, it wasn't a good night for me. So I'm happy to answer the question. Yes.
Me?
Yes.
First of all, I want to say that your prologue is a wonderful story.
Thank you.
It is a very good short story, in my opinion.
Oh, thank you.
Well. And also, I want to ask you if your grandfather told you stories, the story that you talked about.
My grandfather told me stories, but there was an essence of this kind of story in the kind of story he would tell. He had a very interesting and very shocking life. He was not a doctor as the grandfather is in this book. He was an aeronautical engineer, and so he hadn't expected to be. He came from very poor background and very poor circumstances, and somehow managed to raise himself up through education, because he had been head of his class. So he got to travel a lot, and he would tell these really grand stories about visiting, you know, royalty in far-off places like Ethiopia. And I remember being really little, and I remember him telling me a story about how he had visited the king of Ethiopia, and I don't know that Ethiopia at that moment had a king, you know, like, I did not fact check, and I still kind of don't want to, but that's sort of the essence of this book. And that the king of Ethiopia on his great grand steps had lions, you know, live lions who would, you know, and this to me was, you know, that's amazing. Like, I can't wait to visit the king of Ethiopia one day. Like, so there was grandeur and mystery and you know, improbability in a lot of the stories he told me. He didn't tell me tall tales about his childhood, but about his life. But there was no figure like the tiger's wife in them, and unfortunately no figure like the deathless man either. But yeah, the essence of it is there. Thank you. Yes, and then we'll go. I'm so sorry. I know that hands are going up at like different rates, and I don't know who's had their hand up before and stuff. I'm sorry if I'm accidentally skipping over you. But the lady in purple.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the grave digging scene?
Yeah.
When she is at the orphanage and all the people are digging holes in the vineyard looking for the dead body, hoping that it will kill the child or the children.
Yes.
I found that very fascinating.
The grave digging scene and the whole issue of the body in the vineyard, for those who have read it and those who have not. I read that was heavily influenced by the vampire hunting trip. Not because there was anybody that we met that was digging up a body in a vineyard or anything like that, but because it became apparent that some of these rituals that are rooted in paganism, that predates Christianity and predates Islam and predates Judaism in the Balkans as well, there is a lot of superstition in the Balkans. And there is a tendency towards not only sort of traditional medicine, but also towards these traditional rituals that are supposed to achieve some sort of spiritual cure for like a collective disease, whether it's like a disease of the mind or something like that. And people, a lot of people claim not to believe in it, but in their actions it is apparent that they do. And I mean, in my own house, you know, we're governed by superstitions. My grandmother, when I went vampire hunting, had hidden like 6 pairs of scissors under the bed to cut evil in half if it was going to come home with me. And I had, you know, I dropped something under the bed and I went down and I said, "Grandma, why are you hiding all these scissors under the bed? You know, do you want me to get them for you?" And she was like, "No." Leave them there. The grave digging scene is rooted in that mindset, and this question of leaving something unfinished, leaving a part of yourself, a part of your family elsewhere, and then being punished for it, because that's something that we also believe in my family, that if you do something bad, you'll be punished for it. If you do something good, you'll be punished for it. So better do preventative rituals. I certainly don't, you know, I don't mean to suggest in any way that this is something that commonly happens in the Balkans and that, you know, there's bodies all over the place.
I wondered if it had to do with the war, or if there was some, because it felt very sinister when she goes into the bar and she's new in the village and people immediately stop talking and look at her, and then there's a body in the vineyard, and there's a sense that you had to belong to one side or the other, and that you were still, even though the war was over, that still lingered on. In some places that it does. Just as it lingers on in any place that's had, you know, that kind of conflict recently or you know, and communities, especially communities that have been affected by it very deeply and very recently. I've met people in the Balkans who say now, live and let live, and let's just not talk about it anymore. Which is something that my family does, and then there's people who really hold a grudge, just like, you know, people do here. So I think that I'm glad that came across, that sinister feeling, because particularly in the veterans village, in the veterans community, and the you know, and in the hostility of the family who was digging up the body, there is this idea of non-interference from outsiders, you know, and that's something that I've experienced here and there, and all over the Balkans too. Like when I've experienced it, it hasn't just been, you know, Serbs or just been Croats. Like when that's a sense that is ingrained in very small pockets in very few places, but it exists like it does everywhere. So thank you. Yes.
You've achieved success at a very young age. I read you first in the New Yorker and other short stories. You're fantastic. Thank you for coming. Do you feel pressure, and how do you find time to write? And what direction next? Are you writing again still?
I am still writing, but the question was about pressure and future trajectory, I guess. Well, thank you for reading me since the New Yorker. I do feel pressure. It would be a total lie to say that I don't. I think though it's a different kind of pressure. It's twofold. One is that there's the pressure of writing under completely different conditions now, because, you know, you write your first book and you're entirely by yourself, and, you know, you sit there and there are days and you're like, nobody's ever going to read this, so I might as well just do whatever I like, you know, and I'll just put this crazy elephant in here and that'll be fun for me when I'm reading it 100 years from now. and and so there is this sort of sense of isolation and despair, but and then suddenly that has changed. You are all here, and who knows? After this talk, many of you may walk out and never meet me again, and that's fine. But there is this sense of readership now, and not only that. The condition of writing is different. Like now somebody is going to be reading it, and that first somebody is going to be your editor, and so there's the learning how to do that, which I think I've gotten over that portion of it, because that was the first. But then the other question was that I did not want to. When I was writing The Tiger's Wife, the emotional trigger for it was a deeply traumatic event that meant. That really meant something in my life. It shook me up a lot. And there's a kind of integrity to that, I think, that that you can't fake. Like, it's something that I needed to write. And my personal pressure that I feel a lot more than external pressure is managing to produce something that is emotionally honest again, as opposed to just writing something because, now I have to write something else. And I want it to be the right project. And what terrifies me is this idea of spending like 2 years on a project that I'm like, yes, this is it. And then getting to the end and realizing, oh no, I didn't mean any of those things and I didn't need to write this. So that's the pressure. And but I am working on it. I think I've gotten over the hump of that. And I've started working on a second novel and a couple of short stories as well. So hopefully, yeah. Thank you.
If you like Joyce Carol Oates,
I hope so too. Thank you. The lady in purple.
In the book, you discuss the creation of stories and the mythology and how stories get embellished over generations. And you're a storyteller, a wonderful one. But you also talk about this notion of keeping certain stories to yourself. And I was wondering if you could explain that a little bit, the dichotomy between being a storyteller and the creation of it, yet feeling that sometimes shouldn't be shared.
Sure. The question was about the dichotomy of storytelling and then this notion of stories being kept to yourself. Coming from the Balkans, a lot of oral storytelling, big tradition. But everybody, I mean, the way everybody tells you a story, there's no straight. And people who've been to the Balkans here or are from the Balkans in this audience know, like, you can't tell a straight story. You did not go to the corner store today to get milk. You went. You were on your way to the store to get milk from which because the milk had expired 3 days ago, and damn your son for doing that. And then on the stairs on the way down, you met the neighbor who annoyed you for this reason, and it was your frustration with the neighbor that caused you to trip in the gutter and fall over and nearly to be run over by a vehicle. I mean, this is you did not go to the corner store, and God help the person who meets you on the way back from the corner store, because they're gonna get this story of how you went to the corner store. It's this grand sort of, but I think that there is this idea there, and in my own life I've experienced this, of earning a story from somebody. This notion that certain stories can only be told to certain people when they're ready to receive the story. I mean, it's an idea of a kind of rite of passage from one person to another. I trust you enough to tell you this now. And it happens everywhere. It can happen when you walk into a bar and the random person who's sitting next to you sees something in the conversation that you have with them, and you earn this story about how their life was changed, or about how something significant happened. And then, 6 years later, you remember it when something, sort of switches on in your own life that rolls over in that direction. And it's a great thing, because those earned stories that you keep to yourself for special occasions, for the occasions that warrant their telling, they're like a universal thing. Like, they hit notes in people, and this happens every day in daily life. And I think that's where that notion comes from. that every single one of us is a storyteller. And there are certain people to whom you'll tell certain things that happened in your life, and there's certain people that you won't tell, you know? And then sometimes you'll tell it to a stranger, and I think that, yeah, that's where that's based. Thank you. Yes, all the way back.
I loved reading your book, and I'm hoping I'll be able to see it in a movie.
The question was about plans in the direction of a movie, and I not yet. Though that would be fun. I mean, that would be fantastic. I would really enjoy seeing that play out, and I think, yeah. Thank you. I'll keep your support in mind. Yes.
I was going to talk. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I have enjoyed this talk so much. It has been a treat and a surprise because I came to listen to the young person with the old soul voice, and here you are with a fantastic humor, which makes me wonder, have you ever written anything satirical?
I have not. I'm terrified of satire because because I feel like in satire more than anything, more than any other genre of writing, the line between being really good and just okay is so thin, and that would, you know, I don't think that I would be able to do it. Oh, thank you very much. But it is thank you. That's wonderful encouragement. It is sort of a terrifying. Thank you. And
I was going to jump on the movie story. You were born in the 80s. Did you get to see the movies by Costa Rica?
I did see movies by Costa Rica, and it's something that we sorry, the question was about whether I had seen movies by the Yugoslav film director Emir Kusturica, and I did. And I've seen Underground, which also starts with that's like the one movie that like everybody shows their kids. Like when you hit like 12, everybody, like your parents will show you Underground. This is who you are, and you know, yes. So if you haven't seen it, go and see it. It's fantastic. But I've seen it, and it actually has a connection to this book because, like this book, it starts a part of it starts with the bombing of Belgrade by German forces in '41. And the bombing of the zoo.
Yeah, the tiger.
And the tiger, yes. And the tiger, in the movie, I'll spoil it for you, the tiger bites it right away. You know, but it's a very common motif. It's a very common motif in sort of Balkan literature and film as well, and like references because it was this shocking thing that happened. The city was bombed, and suddenly there were droves of animals roaming the streets. And there's people who tell you, you know, like, oh yes, I was there when the, you know, wolf ran down the street, and I thought that's a big dog, you know, and then was later told, you know, and then later caught it, so, you know, and then they tell you the long story, right? They went to the store and there was the big dog. So yeah, I have seen that.
So it's because I mean you have a little bit of the sense of humor.
Yes.
And so
and it's actually like Kusturica's films are actually very, very funny, and that speaks to that. I think that there's a regional tendency to treat really serious subject matter with a lot of laughter, because if you didn't, there would be a lot of there would be a lot of seriousness to be had, you know, if you, yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Could you tell us one more story about your vampire hunting, like an actual incident that happened?
Sure, I'll tell an anecdote from vampire hunting. Just trying to pick a good one. We had the second place that we went to in our quest was this water mill that was supposedly been haunted by the vampire Sava Savanovic, about whom a short story and a film had been made. You know, it was in this really secluded village down in like near a river, you know. That was the extent of the directions. The village is there, there's a river, find the watermill. We went trundling down this godforsaken gravel path that led absolutely nowhere, and, you know, would find occasional like a cluster of houses, and go and knock on people's doors and say, "The vampire?" The people in that particular area wanted absolutely nothing to do with us. We didn't get a single hit of, yes, come on in and get drunk with us, we'll tell you about the vampire. And finally we met this man, as we were like at the bottom of the slope, we met this man who had been hiking from I don't know where, with like, you know, the hat with the feather in it and everything, and like the walking staff, and he said the watermill is, you know, that way. You'll find one church and another church, and then you'll find the watermill. So we get to this church, and there's offerings on the stairs, and they're very mysterious offerings, like the bits of animals, and money, and you know, it was, and we realized that that was the church where the vampire coming to life in the movie had been filmed. So we were on the right track, and finally we follow the path down to this watermill that's just middle of nowhere still, and there's a little chapel right across from the watermill, and people that we had run into since the guy with the feather had said there's absolutely no such place here. There's no such story, no vampire whatsoever. I don't know what you're talking about. So we get to the bottom, and there's this little chapel right across it, the watermill, and we crawl through this maze of nettles that have been artificially planted in front of the watermill, and we get inside, and there's stakes.
Oh.
There's stakes on the ground, you know, just laid out just in case, and that's what I mean by that sort of ritualistic, like, I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, that doesn't exist here. But just in case it does, we put stakes in the watermill if you can get past the nettles. And I hope you can get past the nettles on your way back, because if the stakes don't work and you can clear the fence to the chapel, you're okay. And that's sort of the yeah, that was enlightening. We were going to spend the night in that watermill, but we opted against it. So yeah, that was it. Yes.
Where did this article get published?
It was in Harper's. The article was in Harper's.
When was this?
The fall of 2010. It's called Twilight of the Vampires. I think it's online as well. So yeah, it was fun. Yes.
Do you think people in your part of the world will enjoy this?
That's a good question. The question was about the reception for the book in my part of the world. That was a big concern for me, and I was very nervous about it for various reasons, because, and so far the reception's been really good, and I feel so lucky that it has, because to have people from back home stand behind it, that's like the, that's the emotional, like gold standard of having done something right. By a lot of people, because there's a lot of ways you can offend a lot of people, and I'm glad that people liked it. Yeah. Thank you. There was a hand. Yes.
How old were you when you felt you were going to be able to write professionally and make a living doing it?
I went to grad school when I was 20. So I had hoped that it would be some time down the line, but that's when I decided that writing professionally would be something that I would want to do. So I think that, age is such a... I get asked a lot about my age because it is low, apparently, and I think that, it in some ways it has nothing to it's I'm very lucky that I got started early and that I was able to proceed early. I know people who've become, wonderful successes and written their first novels at the age of 60, and there's just no formula for it. There's no formula for any of it at all. So yeah. Thank you. I guess I'll take, what time is it? Yes, I guess I'll take one more question. There's one. I'll take two more questions. Yes, sir, because there's one back there, and I'll get, yes.
So, the editing process, how
Yes.
much did it change any of the meaning, the style of your writing? Does it just tighten things up? Are you frustrated by it?
The editing process, I was lucky enough that that I fell into that place where I got like the best possible editor, because he completely respected and loved and understood the universe of the book to be what it is. And he didn't want to change that in any way. But he was great because he would say, this sentence is simply not working, or you can say this better, or, which was the most common thing, you know, Joe can't be doing this in chapter 6 if he's doing this in chapter 5, and that was, you know, so it was a very, it was an involved process that made the book stronger because it removed, because it picked out its bad elements. But I was lucky enough that at no point was I asked to change the vision of the book, and that was great. Yeah.
You felt your style was writing was
yeah. I mean, my biggest problem as a writer is, you know, was take out these like a common note for me was, here's 6 descriptive passages, pick 3, and you know, that would yeah. So yeah, thank you very much. The very last question, has there been a hand? Oh, yes, was there a hand in the corner? No, ma'am. I speak 2.5 languages. I speak I speak English and Serbo-Croatian, which, if you want to divide it up, is actually 3 languages. I speak a little bit of French. I get by. So, thank you all so much for coming. Thank you.